Bill's world crumbled when Katie, his wife of 15 years, coldly declared, "You're not the owner of me," before admitting her affair and suggesting an open marriage. Shocked and betrayed, Bill made a bold decision. He filed for divorce. A year later, he stood stronger, but an unexpected encounter with Katie reopened old wounds and revealed the chilling depths of her deception. How did Bill rebuild his life and find hope again? But before diving into the full story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss a new one. Bill sat in his favorite chair by the window, the early morning light casting soft shadows on the floor. It was the time of day he cherished most, before the house came alive with the noise of his daughters and the bustle of everyday life. The world outside was still, the quiet only interrupted by the occasional hum of a passing car or the chirp of a bird in a tree. He took a deep breath, savoring the calm that surrounded him. It was in these moments, when everything felt still and uncomplicated, that he found clarity. "Hey, sir," Hodge said, clicking his heels together. "This is my time to reflect," he muttered to himself, the words barely audible over the distant sound of his wife's alarm clock buzzing in the next room. "To remember why I chose this life." He often found himself looking back at how it all started. The life he had built, the choices he had made. It seemed so simple then, so perfect. He had met Katie in college, a whirlwind romance that felt too good to be true. They were both young, full of hopes and dreams, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. It wasn't long before they were inseparable, drawn to each other by a force they couldn't explain, but both welcomed with open arms. Katie was everything he had ever wanted in a partner: smart, beautiful, and warm. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and before he knew it, they were married. Bill thought about their wedding day, how everything had felt so right. The ceremony was small, intimate, just close family and friends. Yet, it was perfect in its simplicity. They started their life together with the kind of love that people often dream about. Over time, they built a family, first with Jill and then with Jenny. Their daughters brought them joy in ways Bill hadn't expected, and he was grateful for every moment he got to spend with them. Bill enjoyed the simple things in life, fixing things around the house, mowing the lawn on Saturday mornings, and helping his daughters with their homework. He found satisfaction in being present, in knowing that his role in their lives was important. Katie, on the other hand, had taken on the task of managing their family's logistics. She handled the birthdays, the school events, the dentist appointments, the grocery lists. She kept everything running smoothly, and Bill admired her for it. "Katie managed the logistics of our lives," he would often say with a smile, ensuring birthdays were celebrated and dentist appointments weren't missed. Now that's hard work. It was a rhythm they had fallen into effortlessly, and it felt like they were invincible, like nothing could ever disrupt the balance they had worked so hard to create. Life was simple, and they were happy. But Bill, in his quiet moments like this, knew deep down that the peaceful calm of their early life would soon be replaced by something he could never have predicted. He just didn't know it yet. Father's Day was always special in their household, a day when the world seemed to pause just for Bill. It wasn't about grand gestures or extravagant gifts. It was the little things that made it memorable. Katie would wake up early, the smell of bacon and eggs filling the air as she prepared a simple breakfast. The girls would race into the living room, homemade cards clutched in their hands, eager to present their creations. Bill would smile, his heart swelling with pride as they handed him the cards, each one carefully crafted with messages of love and admiration. "Happy Father's Day, Daddy!" they would cheer in unison, their faces beaming. It was a moment that made everything feel right, no matter what else was going on in their lives. Katie always made sure the day was filled with meaningful moments, even if the celebrations were modest. They would sit down together to eat breakfast, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. It was in those quiet moments that Bill felt truly appreciated, the love of his family surrounding him like a warm blanket. "Father's Day was one of those rare occasions when the spotlight turned to me," Bill often said. "Katie and the girls made sure I felt special, even if the celebrations were modest." As the morning unfolded, they would spend time together, usually going for a walk or playing a game in the backyard. It wasn't about doing anything extraordinary. It was about being present with each other, savoring the simple joys of family life. Bill cherished these moments, knowing how precious they were. They were his anchor, reminding him of the strength of the bond they shared, the foundation upon which they had built their family. For Bill, these quiet Father's Days were more than just a tradition. They were a symbol of the life he had chosen and the love that had sustained him. But little did he know, the rhythm of these moments was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As time passed, Bill began to notice subtle changes in Katie's behavior, small shifts that, at first, he brushed off as the result of stress or the demands of daily life. Katie, once the picture of warmth and attentiveness, seemed different. She started working later and later, her evenings spent at the office long after the girls had gone to bed. There was no longer the familiar hum of conversation over dinner or the playful banter they used to share while cleaning up the kitchen. Bill would sit at the table, his mind preoccupied with the usual concerns of the day, but Katie's absence felt like a growing void. She would return home late, her face tired but not just from work. There was something in her eyes, a distance that hadn't been there before. When she was home, she seemed distracted, as though her mind was elsewhere. Even during family moments that used to be filled with laughter and connection, Katie appeared detached. Katie worked later, smiled less, and seemed distant even in her moments of presence, Bill reflected to himself, though he didn't yet want to admit what his instincts were telling him. He told himself it was just the pressures of life catching up to her, a result of the stress of managing everything, work, the kids, the house. Maybe it was just a phase, he thought. Everyone went through hard times, didn't they? But as time wore on, the changes became harder to ignore. Katie's appearance started to shift too. She began dressing more stylishly, often wearing clothes that seemed more suited for a night out than a quiet evening at home. She would change into these outfits just before heading out, and Bill started to notice it more often. Skirts and heels, a careful attention to her hair and makeup, a look that was more polished than he had ever seen her at home. One evening, she came home from work dressed in a sharp new outfit, her makeup done more intensely than usual. Bill didn't say anything at first. He told himself it was just her way of unwinding after a busy day, that maybe she was just trying to feel good about herself again. But when she kissed him goodnight, there was no spark, no warmth, just a brief touch, and she disappeared into their bedroom. It felt like a shift, an invisible wall rising between them. In hindsight, Bill would realize that these were the first cracks in their relationship, signs he had ignored or dismissed, too busy trying to hold on to the idea of the perfect life they once had. But at the time, he didn't know. He just hoped the distance was temporary, a phase that would eventually pass. What he didn't know was that the distance between them was only growing, and the changes Katie was going through would soon come to a head. A year had passed since that Father's Day, and this time, the day felt different. It wasn't just because it was Bill's birthday, too. Something about the way Katie was acting made him uneasy. He had already noticed the subtle changes in her behavior, but this year they seemed more pronounced. She was more distant than ever, snapping at the girls for no reason and brushing off Bill when he tried to engage her in conversation. It was as if she had built up a wall, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to break through. She started working late, snapping at the kids and me, dressing up more often. Something didn't sit right with me, Bill thought, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the growing discomfort he felt every time Katie was near. Her clothes had changed too, skirts, heels, and outfits that felt more appropriate for a night out than a quiet evening at home. Bill had seen the change gradually, but now it felt like she was intentionally trying to look different, to distance herself from the life they once shared. The Friday before Father's Day, Katie left for work dressed in a sharp skirt and high heels, her hair styled in a way that was far more polished than her usual workday look. Bill barely had a chance to ask her what she had planned for the evening before she grabbed her purse and rushed out the door. She told him she was meeting some coworkers after work, but he didn't feel reassured. Something about it felt off. That night, Bill sat alone, the house feeling unusually quiet without Katie's presence. As the evening stretched on, his mind wandered, the unease in his chest growing with every passing hour. Katie didn't return home until late, much later than usual. When she finally walked through the door, there was a look in her eyes that Bill couldn't quite read. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before heading straight to the bathroom. It was what happened next that unsettled Bill the most. Katie came out of the shower shortly after, her hair damp, and she was unusually quiet, almost distant. She went to bed without saying much, and that's when the thought crossed Bill's mind. Why would she need to take a shower at this hour? I couldn't help but wonder what she had done that required a shower before bed, Bill thought, though he quickly pushed the thought aside. He didn't have any concrete evidence to suggest anything was wrong, but his gut was telling him something wasn't right. He told himself it was just the pressure of work, the stress of balancing everything, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. As the night wore on, Bill's mind kept returning to the small details. Her late nights, her change in appearance, the way she seemed to be pulling away from him. Each time, he found himself more unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Katie wasn't telling him, and the more he tried to ignore it, the more the doubt gnawed at him. Yet without proof, he was left in the dark, caught between his suspicions and his desire to believe in the life they had built together. The following morning, Bill woke up to an eerie silence. The house felt different, colder. Katie was already up, preparing for the day ahead. She moved around the kitchen, distracted and focused, but there was no warmth in her actions. No good morning or the usual kiss goodbye as she headed out the door with the girls. Bill stood in the hallway for a moment, watching her go. No kiss goodbye. Something felt off, he thought, a gnawing sensation creeping into his chest. Normally, their mornings were brief but affectionate, quick exchanges of love before everyone went their separate ways for the day. But today was different. Katie had barely acknowledged him, her attention consumed by something Bill couldn't understand. The absence of her usual closeness left him unsettled, his mind racing with the possible reasons behind her behavior. As the day wore on, Bill couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Katie had left with the girls, and the house was silent once more. He found himself aimlessly wandering through the rooms, unsure of what to do with himself. He couldn't focus on work or even enjoy the rare solitude. His thoughts kept drifting back to Katie, the way she had seemed so distant. The oddness of the previous night felt like the walls were closing in on him, and he needed an escape, even if just for a little while. In summary, he grabbed his jacket and went out, hoping the change of scenery would help. His feet led him to the local coffee shop, a small place that had become a familiar escape from the tension at home. The moment he stepped inside, the smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air, and for a brief second, he felt a sense of calm. But it didn't last long. Bill ordered his coffee and found a quiet corner by the window, trying to distract himself with a newspaper. But the words blurred in front of him. His mind kept returning to Katie. Her strange behavior, her lack of affection, the silence that had grown between them. He sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the uncertainty press down on him. It was then that Missy, the barista who often worked the morning shift, came over to check on him. She noticed his downcast expression and the furrow in his brow, the tension in his shoulders. "Are you okay, Bill?" she asked, her voice gentle yet concerned. Bill hesitated for a moment before responding, his voice low. "I've got a lot on my mind," he confessed, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He wasn't sure why he had said it. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the constant worry. But in that moment, he felt a strange comfort in being able to speak his thoughts aloud. Even if it was to someone who barely knew him, Missy offered a sympathetic smile but didn't press further. Instead, she left him to his thoughts, and Bill stared out the window, feeling the unsettling weight of his doubts grow even heavier. Father's Day arrived, and Bill woke up with a mixture of excitement and quiet anticipation. He had hoped that this year, like the others before it, would be a day to celebrate him, a simple acknowledgement of all the roles he played as a husband and father. He was looking forward to breakfast with Katie and the girls, the homemade cards, and the little moments of love that marked the day. But as he slowly got out of bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When he walked into the kitchen, it was empty. There was no sound of the girls arguing over cereal or Katie humming a tune while she made coffee. He checked the clock and the hours seemed to slip by faster than he expected. It wasn't until he checked his phone that he realized what had happened. Katie had forgotten his birthday. She had taken the girls to the beach for the day, leaving Bill behind. He realized that his father had stayed at work keeping the phone stored away since his death and wasn't expecting any of the phone calls he was expecting. They remembered my birthday, but I never expected Katie to forget, Bill thought, the sting of it hitting him harder than he expected. He had assumed that even with everything going on between them, she would at least acknowledge the significance of the day. But it seemed as though the woman, who had once made sure every birthday and special occasion was celebrated, had completely forgotten. Trying to shake off the disappointment, Bill picked up the phone and dialed his mother's number, hoping for some comfort. The conversation started normally enough, but as the call went on, his mother's tone shifted. "Don't worry, she's probably got something planned for later," Bill's mom said, almost too casually, as if trying to convince him that everything was fine. But Bill couldn't shake the doubt that had settled in his chest. It didn't sound like Katie had anything planned. She didn't seem interested in him at all, let alone in making the day special. His mother's reassurance felt empty, and the unease in Bill only deepened. As the afternoon wore on, Bill tried to distract himself, but his thoughts kept returning to Katie's absence. When he went to the coffee shop later that day, he was greeted by Missy, who had just finished her shift. She had a concerned look on her face, which Bill hadn't expected. She leaned over to speak with him quietly, and that's when she told him the news. Missy had been injured at work. "I'm all right," Missy assured him. But Bill couldn't help but feel an additional layer of concern building within him. He didn't want to burden her with his own problems, but hearing about her injury only added to the growing sense of unease that had taken hold of him. It felt like everything was spiraling, one worry after another, and he couldn't seem to stop it. Katie had forgotten his birthday. His mother's casual reassurance felt hollow. Missy had been hurt at work. All of it was compounding, leaving Bill feeling more isolated than ever, unsure of where to turn or what to believe. The weight of the situation pressed down on him as he realized how much things had shifted between him and Katie, and how much he still didn't understand. Bill needed a distraction. The unease gnawing at him had only intensified after the events of Father's Day, and he couldn't seem to escape it. He needed to clear his head, to get away from the silence and the growing tension at home. He grabbed his jacket and headed to the local sports bar, hoping that the noise of the crowd and the distraction of a game on TV might help him shake off the feeling of dread that had taken over his thoughts. The bar was busy, filled with the usual patrons, guys watching sports, laughing and sharing drinks. Bill found a spot at the bar and ordered a beer, trying to let the buzz of the crowd drown out his worries. He kept his gaze fixed on the TV screen, but the images didn't register. His mind was elsewhere, his thoughts consumed by Katie and the distance that had crept into their marriage. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but he had no proof, nothing concrete to hold on to. That's when he struck up a conversation with two men sitting next to him. Lance and Jerry seemed like regulars, the kind of guys who came in to unwind after work. They exchanged pleasantries, and soon, the talk turned to relationships. Bill wasn't looking for advice, but the conversation turned in that direction naturally. Lance, the more outspoken of the two, started talking about his own marriage, a relationship that had ended badly. Bill listened, unsure if he wanted to hear the details. But then, Lance dropped a bombshell. "She's cheating on you, Bill," Lance said bluntly, not even bothering to sugarcoat his words. Bill felt his stomach twist. He hadn't wanted to think about it. hadn't wanted to entertain the idea that Katie might be unfaithful. But Lance's words struck a nerve, and for a moment, Bill was paralyzed, the reality of it all hitting him harder than he expected. "I don't want to believe that," Bill responded, shaking his head, as if the words themselves could make the possibility disappear. Marcy nodded and looked at Bill. Lance didn't back down. "I divorced my wife over it," he continued, his voice tinged with regret. "But it was the biggest mistake I ever made. If you still love her, you'll find a way to forgive." Bill felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. The idea of forgiveness, of trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his marriage, suddenly felt impossible. But Lance's words echoed in his mind, and despite himself, Bill couldn't help but consider the possibility that his worst fears might be true. He finished his beer, thanked the men for the conversation, and left the bar in a daze. The walk back to his car felt longer than usual, the weight of the doubt pressing on his chest with each step. He had wanted to clear his head, but instead his suspicions had only deepened. His mind was swirling with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Had Katie been unfaithful? Was the life they had built really as perfect as he had believed? Or had it all been an illusion? He couldn't shake the thought that something was terribly wrong, and the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger the doubts became. The doubts that had been gnawing at Bill for weeks finally began to take shape in the most undeniable way. He had always told himself that he was overthinking things, that the changes in Katie's behavior were simply the result of stress or the demands of everyday life. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment he saw her at the grocery store. Bill had stopped by to pick up a few things, not expecting to find anything unusual. As he made his way down the aisles, he turned the corner by the produce section, and there she was. Katie was in her car, parked just outside the store. But she wasn't alone. There was a younger man with her, someone Bill didn't recognize. He watched from a distance as they exchanged a laugh, their body language far too familiar, too intimate. Bill's heart sank as he realized that what he had suspected all along was finally confirmed. She didn't even try to deny it. Bill stood frozen, his breath catching in his chest as he watched them. Katie's smile was bright, too carefree, and the way she leaned in to say something to the man only made it worse. Bill's mind raced, and for a moment he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He wanted to shout, to confront her right there in the parking lot, but he didn't. Instead, he turned away, his body moving on autopilot as he left the store without looking back. The drive home was a blur. His thoughts were chaotic, a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and hurt. The life he thought he had, the family he had built with Katie, now felt like a lie. It wasn't just the affair he had suspected. It was everything, the small lies, the little moments of distance that had piled up over time, all pointing to the same devastating truth. When Bill got home, he stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings. The same house, the same life. But everything felt different now. His heart was heavy with the weight of the truth, but he knew there was no turning back. Katie had betrayed him, and he couldn't unsee what he had just witnessed. It was over. Bill wasted no time. He immediately began to make preparations, gathering everything he needed for the divorce. He didn't have the strength to talk to Katie about it yet, but he knew it was the only way forward. The idea of continuing to live a lie, to pretend that everything was fine, was too much to bear. He was done. There was no more room for doubt, no more uncertainty. Katie's affair had shattered whatever hope he had left for their marriage, and now it was time to move on, no matter how painful the process would be. As Bill sat down, the reality of what he was about to do settled over him. This was the end, but it was also the beginning of something new, something that, at this moment, felt uncertain, but that he knew he had to face. If anything had gone wrong when the mission failed, he would have to accept it as something unknown. He would need to live with it. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with years of unspoken resentment and raw emotion. Bill stood there, holding the evidence that would shatter everything Katie had worked so hard to hide. His heart hammered in his chest, but there was a cold resolve in his eyes. Katie, on the other hand, stood rigid, her face twisted in a mixture of defiance and arrogance. She was still trying to hold on to the control she had once wielded so effortlessly. With a sharp sneer, Katie broke the silence. "Yes, I have a lover. So what? Do you really think you're that important to me?" Her tone was laced with contempt, as though she believed her actions could still somehow be justified. Bill's lips curled into a bitter smirk, the pain of her betrayal lacing his voice. "I never thought you were this kind of person. Everything I did was for this family, and this is how you repay me?" He paused for a moment, his voice dripping with disdain. "Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic." Katie's face turned crimson with rage at the harshness of his words. In a fit of fury, she grabbed a glass from the counter and slammed it onto the floor with such force that it shattered into a million pieces. "Are you trying to lecture me?" she yelled, her eyes wild. Bill remained unshaken, his voice cold, unyielding. "Someone as filthy as you? You think I'd waste my breath trying to lecture you?" He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto hers, and continued with chilling calm. "No, Katie, you're wrong if you think I won't do anything. I have all the evidence of what you've built. And let me be clear, you're not getting a dime of what we've built." Katie's defiance faltered for a split second, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Her eyes narrowed as she questioned him, her voice now tinged with confusion. "What do you mean?" Bill didn't hesitate. Calmly, he pulled out a stack of papers, photos, time-stamped records of her secret meetups with her lover, and even a recording of their conversation from earlier that day. He placed the evidence in front of her, the weight of each document pressing down on her like 1,000 truths. With a slow, deliberate motion, Bill lifted the recording device and played the damning evidence. Katie's own voice, cold and unapologetic, rang out in the room. "Yes, I have a lover. So what?" Bill stared her down, his eyes unwavering, his voice now firm and resolute. "You think I'm stupid? Think again. Wait until we get to court. Everything you wanted. You'll never have it." Katie stood frozen, her arrogant facade crumbling as the reality of the situation sank in. The shock of it all took the wind out of her, leaving her defenseless. Her posture softened, her eyes faltering with a vulnerability Bill had never seen before. Desperate to salvage something, she changed her tone, trying to appeal to Bill with a pleading softness. "Bill, please, I didn't mean..." But Bill, disgusted by her sudden shift, shook his head in disbelief. "You're so fake," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Stay the hell away from me." Katie's once dominant presence had now been reduced to nothing. She stood there, hollow and defeated, as Bill's words echoed through the silence of the room. Bill had thought the worst was over, but Katie's attempt to sabotage his new relationship with Missy made it clear that the damage wasn't finished. She had always been controlling, always had to have the last word, but this was different. Bill had moved on, and Katie couldn't stand it. One afternoon, as Bill and Missy were enjoying a quiet moment at his apartment, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Missy. "Katie's outside." Bill frowned, wondering what she could possibly want now. He walked toward the door, but before he could open it, Katie barged in, her face twisted with anger. "Hazel, I need to talk to you," she demanded, her voice sharp with tension. Missy stood up, instinctively stepping forward to protect the space they had built together. Katie turned on her, her eyes narrowed in fury. "Did you block my number?" Katie snapped, her words laced with venom. Missy stood her ground, unfazed by Katie's hostility. "Yes," she replied coolly, her voice steady. "After your 30 messages calling me an a-hole for living my life." Katie's face flushed with rage, but Missy didn't flinch. The power dynamic had shifted. Missy wasn't afraid of Katie anymore. She wasn't going to let her intimidate her. Bill watched the exchange with a quiet resolve. His feelings for Katie had long since turned to bitterness, and the anger that had once consumed him now felt like a distant memory. He had finally found peace, and no one, not even Katie, could take that from him. Bill opened the door to the main habitat after witnessing the shooting. He was relieved to see that Katie had gone remotely back to sleep. Bill took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm as he addressed Katie. "You destroyed my family. I'll never forgive you for that." Katie's eyes softened for just a moment, but the hardness returned quickly. She opened her mouth as if to argue, to plead for forgiveness, but Bill wasn't interested in hearing it. The woman standing in front of him wasn't the person he had loved. She was a stranger, someone who had broken everything they had built together. "Oh, I'm done," Bill continued, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You made your choices, now you'll live with them." Katie stood there, her anger still palpable, but Bill could see the cracks in her armor. The control she once had was slipping through her fingers, and it was clear that she wasn't used to being on the receiving end of this kind of resolve. No, Bill wasn't angry anymore. He was simply done. He turned to Missy, offering her a reassuring smile. Katie, her face a mixture of defeat and fury, knew the conversation was over. There was no turning back. Bill had made his decision, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of freedom. Bill had always been close to his mother, their bond unspoken but deep. She had been his constant through so many of life's challenges, the one person who had always been there for him. But life, it seemed, was unpredictable. He had just turned the page on one chapter of his life, and the universe was about to deal him another blow. It happened suddenly, the news arriving without warning. Bill was sitting at his kitchen table, sipping his coffee when the phone rang. He answered it, the voice on the other end breaking the quiet stillness of his morning. "Bill, I'm so sorry, but your mother passed away." The words didn't register at first. They couldn't. He felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him, his heart sinking into the pit of his stomach. His mother, the one person who had always been there, was gone. His mind raced, images of their last conversation flooding his thoughts. The last time they had spoken, she had wished him a happy birthday. "Happy birthday, Billy," she had said, her voice warm and comforting. It felt like just yesterday. Now, the memory was the last piece of her he would have, and it hit him like a wave crashing over him. Grief settled in like a heavy weight, suffocating him, leaving him unable to find his bearings. Bill felt numb, but he knew he had to keep going. He had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. He couldn't break now, not in front of anyone. His mind was racing, processing the loss while trying to maintain some semblance of composure. But it wasn't easy. The pain was sharp, raw, and overwhelming. Through the fog of grief, Bill felt a gentle presence at his side. Missy, ever supportive, had sensed his pain even from a distance. She had always been there for him in the way no one else had been, understanding him in ways no one else could. And now, when he needed someone more than ever, she was there. "I'm coming to you, Bill," Missy said, her voice soft but firm over the phone. "You need me." Missy raised her hands toward heaven, her eyes closed. Her words were a lifeline in the midst of his pain, and Bill didn't hesitate. He didn't have the energy to face this alone. And Missy, more than anyone, knew how to offer comfort without judgment. Within moments, she was by his side, holding him as he processed the weight of his loss. Bill didn't say much. There were no words that could ease the sorrow, no phrases that could take away the emptiness he felt. But Missy didn't need words. She simply stayed with him, offering her presence as a steady support. Her quiet strength reminded him that even in the darkest moments, there were people who cared, who would stand by him no matter what. The grief was far from over, but with Missy's support, Bill felt a flicker of hope. In his moment of deepest despair, he knew he wasn't truly alone. The grief of losing his mother was still heavy on Bill's heart, but he knew it was time to talk to his daughters. He had been avoiding the conversation, not wanting to burden them with his pain, but there was no way around it now. His mother had been such an important part of their family, and they deserved to know the truth. One evening, as the girls returned from a visit with Katie, Bill sat them down. He felt a knot in his stomach as he prepared to break the news. He didn't know how they would react, but he had to tell them. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension, as Bill's voice, usually steady, faltered for a moment. "I need to tell you something about your grandmother," Bill began, his voice quiet but firm. "She passed away. I just found out today." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, his daughters didn't react. Then, slowly, their expressions changed. Jill's eyes widened, and Jenny's face softened with understanding. The grief was evident on both of their faces, but it was soon replaced by something else: remorse. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Jenny said, her voice sincere and filled with regret. "We thought you were just being unreasonable. We didn't understand." Jill, who had been quiet until then, looked up at her father, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We thought you were the one who left us, not Mom. We believed her version of everything." Bill's heart ached as he listened to his daughter's apologies. He hadn't expected them to understand right away. For so long, they had only heard Katie's side of the story, and the lies had built walls between them. But hearing their remorse now, Bill felt a weight begin to lift from his shoulders. He had wanted nothing more than to heal the rift between them, to show them that he was still their father, no matter what had happened with Katie. "It's okay," Bill said, his voice thick with emotion. "I understand why you felt that way. I just wanted to protect you, and I didn't know how to explain it all." Jenny reached out first, pulling her father into a hug. Jill quickly followed, both girls enveloping him in their arms. Bill held them tightly, feeling the connection he had missed so much in the past months. In that moment, all the pain and confusion seemed to fade away, replaced by a quiet, healing warmth. They didn't need to say anything more. It was in the embrace, the unspoken promise, that they would rebuild together, that they could move forward, understanding one another in ways they hadn't before. For the first time in a long while, Bill felt like his family was truly whole again. The grief of losing his mother was still heavy on Bill's heart, but he knew it was time to talk to his daughters. He had been avoiding the conversation, not wanting to burden them with his pain, but there was no way around it now. His mother had been such an important part of their family, and they deserved to know the truth. One evening, as the girls returned from a visit with Katie, Bill sat them down. He felt a knot in his stomach as he prepared to break the news. He didn't know how they would react, but he had to tell them. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension, as Bill's voice, usually steady, faltered for a moment. "I need to tell you something about your grandmother," Bill began, his voice quiet but firm. "She passed away. I just found out today." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, his daughters didn't react. Then, slowly, their expressions changed. Jill's eyes widened, and Jenny's face softened with understanding. The grief was evident on both of their faces, but it was soon replaced by something else: remorse. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Jenny said, her voice sincere and filled with regret. "We thought you were just being unreasonable. We didn't understand." Jill, who had been quiet until then, looked up at her father, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We thought you were the one who left us, not Mom. We believed her version of everything." Bill's heart ached as he listened to his daughter's apologies. He hadn't expected them to understand right away. For so long, they had only heard Katie's side of the story, and the lies had built walls between them. But hearing their remorse now, Bill felt a weight begin to lift from his shoulders. He had wanted nothing more than to heal the rift between them, to show them that he was still their father, no matter what had happened with Katie. "It's okay," Bill said, his voice thick with emotion. "I understand why you felt that way. I just wanted to protect you, and I didn't know how to explain it all." Ginny reached out first, pulling her father into a hug. Jill quickly followed, both girls enveloping him in their arms. Bill held them tightly, feeling the connection he had missed so much in the past months. In that moment, all the pain and confusion seemed to fade away, replaced by a quiet, healing warmth. They didn't need to say anything more. It was in the embrace, the unspoken promise, that they would rebuild together, that they could move forward, understanding one another in ways they hadn't before. For the first time in a long while, Bill felt like his family was truly whole again. As time passed, Bill felt more confident in his decision to move forward with Missy. The painful past with Katie was slowly fading, and he found himself growing more comfortable in this new chapter of his life. Bill knew it was time to introduce Missy to his daughters. It had taken a while for him to be sure of the relationship, but Missy had become an important part of his life, and he wanted his daughters to get to know her. The first meeting was simple, a quiet afternoon at Bill's house. Missy arrived with a warm smile, dressed casually, and eager to make a good impression. Bill had explained everything to the girls beforehand, and though they were still adjusting to the changes in their family, they were open-minded, ready to meet the woman who had been so supportive of their dad. When Missy stepped into the living room, Jill and Ginny gave her a tentative greeting. Missy, sensing their hesitance, smiled warmly and started a conversation, making sure to be friendly but not overbearing. The ice quickly began to break as Missy asked the girls about their interests, subtly making the effort to connect without pushing too hard. It didn't take long for Jill and Ginny to warm up to Missy. They found her easy to talk to, her laughter infectious, and her attention genuine. Missy's kindness and natural ability to make others feel comfortable worked its magic, and before long the conversation flowed easily between the three of them. They talked about their favorite movies, books, and even shared some stories about Bill from when they were younger, laughing at how embarrassing some of his old habits were. By the end of the afternoon, Jill and Jenny seemed to be genuinely comfortable with Missy. As the girls helped clear the table after dinner, Jill turned to Bill with a wide smile. "We like her, Dad. She's great." Jenny nodded enthusiastically, adding, "Yeah, she's super cool." Bill couldn't help but feel a surge of relief. This was a huge step, and seeing how quickly his daughters had bonded with Missy filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The healing that had begun in his own heart seemed to spread to his daughters, and together they were starting to rebuild a sense of family. For Bill, it was a moment of quiet triumph. His life, once broken by betrayal, was now filled with hope, something he hadn't dared to imagine just months ago. As the weeks passed, Katie seemed to come to terms with the reality of their divorce. The initial shock and anger had gradually subsided, but deep down, there was still a simmering bitterness. Katie hadn't expected Bill to move on so quickly, and the sight of him with Missy seemed to hurt her more than she cared to admit. One afternoon, Bill was out shopping with Missy when he unexpectedly ran into Katie at the local grocery store. The moment their eyes met, Bill could see the frustration and resentment in her gaze. Katie was no longer the woman he once knew, the one who controlled everything with charm and clever manipulation. Now, she was a shadow of her former self, angry and hurt, her pride struggling to mask the deep pain the divorce had left behind. "You moved on that fast?" Katie sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "I can't believe you're already dating. You're such a fool." Bill stood there, unfazed by her outburst. He had heard countless cruel words from her over the years, and now they held no power over him. He had witnessed the damage she caused to their family, and nothing she said could derail the path he had chosen. Without hesitation, Bill looked her straight in the eye and shrugged, his expression calm and unshakable. "I don't care what you think anymore, Katie. I'm focused on my future." Bill's words hit Katie like a blow. Suddenly, tears began streaming down her face. "Bill, I was wrong," she sobbed, her usual arrogance melting away, replaced by genuine remorse. "I ruined everything. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm truly sorry." But Bill no longer felt anything for her. She had once held control over their relationship, But those days were long gone. Now, there was no room for her bitterness or regret in his life. He had found peace with Missy, and his heart was no longer shackled to the past. Bill turned to Missy, grasping her hand tightly, and together they walked away, leaving Katie standing there, consumed by her regret. The sound of his footsteps echoed with confidence, strong and resolute. He didn't look back. He had learned to let go, to stop caring about Katie's opinions or emotions. His new life, full of hope and peace, lay ahead of him now, and he had no regrets. As the days stretched into months, Bill felt the weight of his past slowly lift. Life with Missy was different. It wasn't the whirlwind romance he had once dreamed of, nor was it an instant escape from his pain. But it was real, grounded in understanding and mutual respect. They took things slowly, carefully building a foundation where trust could grow, where their connection could evolve into something deeper, something lasting. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Bill turned to Missy, his voice calm but filled with a quiet resolve. "I'm ready for a new beginning," he said, the words carrying more weight than he expected. It wasn't just a declaration of moving forward. It was a realization that despite everything, he had found something worth holding on to. Missy smiled at him, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the moment. She didn't rush him, didn't push for promises he wasn't ready to make. They had both learned to take life as it came, no longer trying to force the future to fit into a predetermined mold. Instead, they allowed it to unfold, step by step, embracing the possibility that their relationship could grow into something more, in its own time. As the seasons changed, Bill found himself reflecting on the painful journey that had brought him here. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the loss, it all felt like a distant memory, though it still left its scars. But those scars had healed in a way that allowed him to grow. The pieces of his life that had once been broken were now fitting together in a way he hadn't imagined. His relationship with his daughters was healing, and even though the past could never be erased, it no longer defined him. Despite the heartache, he realized that the painful changes had been necessary. The life he had built with Katie, however imperfect, had served its purpose. It had shaped him, taught him, and ultimately pushed him toward a more authentic version of himself. In the end, the path to happiness wasn't always clear, but it was his to walk. And in this new chapter, he found peace, not just with Missy, but with the man he had become. Still, there was one lingering thought that he couldn't shake. It wasn't regret or bitterness, but a quiet curiosity about what could have been had things turned out differently. Had he known then what he knew now, would he have made different choices? Could anyone have truly understood the depths of love and pain without first experiencing both? As Bill leaned back in his chair, he realized that some questions might never be answered. But maybe that was okay. Life wasn't about finding the perfect answers. It was about embracing the journey, the unexpected turns, and the growth that came with each step forward. And for the first time in a long time, Bill felt ready to see where this new chapter would take him. The future was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer afraid to face it.